Today, once again, the Pharisees want to trap Jesus. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? You must know that the Jews allowed divorce and remarriage. Only they held long discussions to find out what could justify a divorce. Infidelity, said some. Anything, said others. Even bungled cooking. Only a very small minority was against divorce, especially since the time of the prophet Malachi, who says, "Let no one become a traitor to the wife of his youth. Has not God made her a unique being and sustains her by the Spirit of life? And what does this unique being desire? Offspring granted by God." Jesus, like John the Baptist too, was for the ideal of a family united forever. In all societies, laws are made with the intention of protecting the weak and the most vulnerable. In the case of divorce, the danger was that if a Jewish woman was abandoned by her husband, she could survive in society only by attaching herself to another man. Thus she would be committing adultery, and a Jewish woman who committed adultery was liable to be stoned to death. And so, to protect the woman from being stoned, simply because her husband had ditched her, Moses had invented the writ of dismissal. This enables the man to tell the society that this particular woman is no more his wife, and so she is now free. Free, yes, but she risks being left on her own, with nobody around to help her, as we can see in Deuteronomy. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes her a bill of divorce and puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. And if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter husband dislikes her, and writes her a bill of divorce and puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. Let us note also that today's event takes place in the territory of Herod Antipas, who is divorced and remarried to his niece. We know also what happened to John the Baptist and why he was put in prison. The trap laid out before Jesus is therefore simple. It concerns the opposition between what seems to be Jesus' personal opinion and the law of Moses. The Pharisees think that if Jesus refuses divorce and remarriage, he will turn both the authorities and the people against him. And so they put this question to him: is it allowed to send away one's wife? Jesus answers by a call to fidelity, a call to live together and to stay on for the long haul. For if one lets go at the very first hardship, and hardships you will have, at the very first difficulties in accepting the other's viewpoints, how can one succeed in accepting one's own limits and be able to reach beyond them? Does not achievement lie within the reach of those who reach beyond themselves? Jesus reminds the Pharisees of the very first loneliness, that of Adam, in the beginning of creation. God had fashioned for Adam living beings of all sorts, birds, fishes, and beasts of the field, in great numbers around him. God had even associated him in his work of creation by asking him to name every living being. But that was not enough for Adam to find fulfillment. Apparently, he was made for something else. And so God decides to create for man a true companion. Whereas man was fashioned from the earth, God now takes a part of man to create a difference in his humanity. It is really hard for us to imagine the wonder that Adam experiences when he sees the woman by his side as he wakes up from the mysterious sleep that God had induced in him. And lo, man, for the first time, begins to talk. And it is a song of admiration that burst forth from his heart. This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. A man who is Ish in Hebrew calls her Isha, which is woman in Hebrew, to express the communion of spirit that he feels in her presence. When God had made all the animals march past him, man had given them a name. But when God presents him the woman, he recognizes himself in her. And the book of Genesis tells us God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Thus it is the couple that is the image of God. It is humanity that is the image of God. The attraction that man feels for woman and the joy of the woman in receiving man are the expression of the stamp that God has placed on humanity. Man and woman complete and complement each other. While citing the book of Genesis, Jesus says, "Man shall leave father and mother, and the two shall become one." The author of the book of Genesis concludes the passage of the creation of man by saying that man will leave his parents and become attached to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And he says this in an epoch when extended families were the norm. According to the author of Genesis, man and woman are called to become one, and it is the couple who is the complete human being, presenting a better image of God. By writing these lines, the author takes a leap forward by contesting the conception of this time, of his time, according to which women were treated as inferior beings. He designates woman as a partner whom God gives to man to enable him to come to the fullness of his stature. Through their love, man and woman bring to fruition the image of God. The phrase, "And if a woman divorces her husband and marries another, she commits adultery," could refer to Herodias, who had left her husband Herod Philip and got attached to his brother Herod Antipas. Today, unfortunately, many youth prefer to live together without getting married, for they have seen many families breaking up. What once was one flesh has been torn apart, leaving deep wounds, not only in the couple, but in other family members as well. In fact, this situation is far from new. Adam, said St. Augustine, broke himself and has filled the universe with his pieces. The apostles themselves tell Jesus, if this is marriage, it is not at all a good idea to get married. Christ does not condemn us if we do not succeed in reaching the ideal, but gives us his grace to help us in this wonderful adventure that married life is. I think it's a good idea here to quote Pope John Paul II. I warmly exhort the pastors and the whole community of the faithful to come to the help of those who are divorced and remarried. With much charity, all must see to it that they do not feel separated from the Church, because they can, and they even should, as baptized persons, participate in the life of the Church.